WOAY ABC4 Community Forum, where we talk to community leaders and local success stories to discuss important information that affects all of us here in Southern West Virginia. I'm your host, Brandy Lawrence, and today we're joined by another distinguished guest. Dave Perry from the Oak Hill City Council joins us this morning. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us here on the forum.
Thank you, Brandy. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, always. And today we're going to talk about, what just happened in the legislative session and, the local laws and things that are going on here that affect all of us. So
sounds like a great idea. Let's do just a little overview to start with.
Gotcha.
Of course, we all know that the legislative session ended Saturday at midnight, March 11th. And during that session, you had some 3,000 bills introduced. At this point, there were 293 that reached passage. And as of that time, 280 some had been signed by the governor. So it was a very fruitful session, mostly focusing on health issues, education as always, and some personal items interested the public.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to start off, the health is a big thing around here. So we'll talk about Health Bill with 533. And how does this affect hospital funding?
This pertains to the medical institutions in West Virginia, the Osteopathic School, WVU School of Medicine, Marshall, etc. And prior to this, funding came from the pop tax, the soda tax. So this created a dedicated source, which will be the insurance premiums, much like we had years ago on the insurance premium to reduce some of the debt. But this will be directly tied to your insurance premiums, which will, as I said, be a dedicated tax or source to our medical institutions.
And how does that work with, I did see that PEIA, that has been talked about in a bill. Does that affect that at all, or will it be the same for?
PEIA is different in the sense that the PEIA bill increased the reimbursement for rates that hospitals were getting. So it should affect their bottom line somehow.
Gotcha. All right, and then let's get into the Bill 606.
It's a first-time bill, Brandy, and it requires medical persons, staff, to report misconduct, much like educators are required to automatic reporters within 30 days, which hasn't been true in the past.
Gotcha. And how does that impact? Well, actually. Sorry, wrong one. I was actually looking at Bill 518, helps with medical shortages, nursing, things like that. How exactly will this help supplement that, the shortages?
Okay, as we're aware, we hear shortages of doctors, shortages of nurses, shortages of teachers, about a shortage of cash on hand for some of us. But what this does, it allows reciprocal agreements around our surrounding states for those persons, nurses, occupational therapists, etc., to come into the state and practice immediately. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. So more so like recruiting from outside, the state and things like that.
Yes.
Sounds great. And let's see, we got 2007 prohibits a physician from performing.
That's a very significant bill. Up until this time, physicians were not prohibited from performing a irreversible surgery or sex change, as we've known. So this bill disallows physicians from doing those surgeries, from giving medications to a person under the age of 18, which is an adult decision and not necessarily a child's decision or a parent's decision for a child. So it raises it to the individual. It individualizes it.
Gotcha. And it's been a very controversial one. I've seen, a lot of back and forth on that one. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. And then we've got, that was another big one, 2006, that reorganized the DHHR into 3 parts.
We had talked about that in our pre-session interview, if you recall.
Yes.
It did come to fruition in that the DHHR has been reorganized into 3 departments. The Department of Health, the Department of Human Resources, and the Department of Facilities. As I can understand at this time, there wasn't a whole lot of information, a whole lot of details. It's often said the devil's in the details as to how this would be achieved, who would oversight, and what the final results would be. Of course, we know that most legislation has to have rules that go along with it. So I suspect that there will be a set of rules required for each of these three different entities to complete the reorganization.
And hopefully that should help, them cover, more ground at DHHR, and helping people, out in the community.
Absolutely, be more efficient. It's intended to be cost effective and more efficient to the people they serve.
And it looks like this will change up personnel as well a little bit, because I think they have different secretaries for each.
Exactly. You probably would create three distinct secretaries. And probably there would have to be a transfer or reorganization among personnel in DHHR. And particularly child abuse. I would hope that it would create or establish more persons to investigate and protect children. And senior citizens.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
So hopefully that should, really be something great, for the state and really help us out there. And let's see here. And then we get more into the schools. I know that charter schools have been a big topic nationwide. So let's talk about SB 47. What exactly will that do for West Virginia?
All right. As you said, charter schools have been an issue. Well, since I was in the legislature, I left in 2016, and there was legislation enabling that to start with. Now, the funding of charter schools has been addressed in terms of startup funding. Startup funding will allow $300,000 the first year for such as purchasing buildings, renovations, buying school buses, so forth. Then after that, they're entitled or will receive another $100,000, and it appears that it has no accountability, meaning no oversight, and that if they default, it appears at this point, unless I've missed it, there's no recourse for the state to regain that $400,000 if they're not successful.
And as you've been an educator, so how do you feel, personally about this? Do you feel that this will help us more with the charter schools, or do you feel that this is kind of a detriment to us?
Well, what concerns me is the charter school legislation reduces funding to the local schools and the state aid formula as a student would leave, and that's not being backfilled. But still, state schools or state-supported schools are still required to provide the same kind of, or the same curriculum. The other thing that concerns me is the criteria for being a teacher lowers the standards, the accountability as far as testing. So don't want to sound critical. I hope it's a success. But the thing that also concerns me is it could be, and it focuses on, I'm afraid, not devalues, but lessens the education possibilities for the middle and underclass people. That we're starting to create, it appears to me, what we had years ago, an education both at the public level and college level for the aristocrats. And that concerns me rather than the general population. And of course, that's why America's educational system is so popular. We've afforded an education to all persons, regardless of socioeconomic status.
Definitely. And do you feel that the Hope Scholarship, I know that's also been a topic of conversation, how do you feel that that will play into this? Do you think that that will help any of the lower income, individuals get into these type of schools, or do you feel that it's just kind of, a little muddy there?
We don't want to confuse the Promise Scholarship with the Hope. Mm-hmm. The Hope goes to a student that is either home instructed, or a private school. And again, it depletes or takes money away from the funding of public education. Promise Scholarship, yes, if you can score properly and so forth on the test, then you would get the Promise Scholarship, which is very beneficial to any and all students.
Right, and let's see, what else we got? We've got a lot of education bills here. So what about HB 2346, about the bus drivers and the shortages that occurred there?
As you've traveled across the nation, you'll see signs everywhere. Bus drivers needed. Bus drivers needed. We have a critical shortage, which means that if students can't get to school, they're not going to be educated. So we have few people applying for bus driver jobs. Part of it's because of the salaries and, of course, the testing process and certification process. But what this does is allow retired bus drivers to come back and drive with not being penalized for the number of days that they drive. Prior to this, you had a set number of days that you could drive. When that ran out, you couldn't drive, and your retirement would be penalized. So this removes all of that and allows a retiree to drive an unnumbered number of days.
Hopefully that will help us out, there with our shortage. And let's see. Oh, sorry, next one. And this was another big one, actually. I think we reported on it a little bit, the student discipline bill.
Let me make a little personal editorial, if that's possible, not necessarily the view of the station. But, if you look at a school law book, it's about 3 inches. And the West Virginia Department of Education gets accused of all of that bureaucracy. Well, every time a piece of legislation passes, then the Department of Education has to adopt a bill to enforce it. So that comes from the legislature. Now, I said that to say that a student discipline code, a student disciplinary process already existed. And as I'm familiar with both, the legislative proposal probably doesn't have as much teeth or is not as effective as what already existed. So we've kind of recreated the wheel. And the other thing, and it's also an unfunded mandate in terms of requiring intervention, which intervention should occur. But the thing that concerns me most, and again, this is a personal editorial, I haven't been in the legislature, the public just overwhelmingly defeated an amendment that says we want the Department of Education to run public education. And I see more and more, not only in education, the tax department and other areas, the legislature is slowly taking control, oversight of these different independent agencies. And that's an editorial, again, not necessarily yours or the station.
Oh, no. But, it's definitely, an opinion, and it's a viewpoint that's out there. So it needs to be said.
And
definitely.
I think it's a factor that needs to be considered, and it needs to be taken to heart what the public voted on the amendment. Definitely. And apparently it's being ignored.
Definitely. All right. Well, we will get more into this after our break. Oh, yes, actually, if you can give us the contact information for the Oak Hill City Council so people can keep up, more with what's going on with you guys.
Okay, Oak Hill City Council contact, as the last time, of course, you would get in touch with the main city line, depending on whether you had an issue on sewer, depending you had an issue on management, taxes, sanitary, but call a general number at Oak Hill. And I'm sorry, I don't know the website. We have a website as well. But
I may actually have that.
Let me look here. Just 1 minute, Brandy. I'm sorry.
Yep. OakHillWV.gov for the website. And let's see the phone number if I have that here.
The number for Oak Hill is 304-469-2820.
2820. All right. Well, be sure to get in touch with Oak Hill City Council for any of your needs in Oak Hill. And we will be right back after the break. We're here at Community Forum with Dave Perry of the Oak Hill City Council, and we're talking about some of the laws passed from the recent legislative session that ended. And now we're going to get into the suicide prevention resources. We saw that was a thing for, like the middle and high school students, I believe. Mm-hmm.
Teen suicide, of course, is being recognized across the nation. A lot of it is occurring because of bullying. What resources and what's available out there to teens? And the legislature passed this time that on all student identification cards, both at the college level and public school level, that contact numbers for suicide prevention must be printed on there, which would involve the Suicide Crisis Lifeline and the Crisis Treatment Line. which would be readily available on the back of a student identification card for students who are looking for help or resources or considering.
Well, hopefully that'll be, a helpful resource for,
Absolutely.
anybody that's
Absolutely.
experiencing that. And then we can go back to education here. And let's see, SB 187, making it a felony for any school employees to engage in a relationship or an inappropriate relationship with a student, regardless of age. How did that kind of come to be, especially in relation to the child marriage bill? Because I can kind of see that this 187, it's more so looking at it from a inappropriate standpoint of like statutory rape and, pretty much taking advantage of your position as an adult. Whereas the child marriage bill, it still has some leeway there for teens to get married, especially to somebody who is, I believe, 4 years. It can't be more than 4 years.
Exactly. You're right on, Brandy. I tell you, you've done your homework.
Yes.
Not to make a pun, but both these kind of marry each other.
Yeah.
In that the marriage bill, prior to this, marriage could go to the circuit court and get an order to be married at any age. This bill requires that you must be 18 years of age. There is no appeal to the circuit court, and there's a provision, as you said, kind of a waiver for 16 to 17-year-olds to be married. However, the person who is marrying that individual can be no more than 4 years older than that individual. So then the bill for sexual inappropriate activity between persons being supervised by a teacher and even volunteers has created a felony. That any sexual activity, regardless of the age of the student, becomes a felony and cannot occur. And that's kind of a general principle across the nation. A supervisor being over an insubordinate can't happen. We call that sexual harassment in the workplace. But I think this is important. It protects those teenagers, youngsters, who are vulnerable to those supervisory people. Not that we have a large number out there, but it certainly gives them, makes it a felony, gives them another ounce of protection.
Definitely, yep. So it's SB 187, and then more into the marriage bill a little bit. I know that's also been, a really controversial bill, and they actually, had a lot of back and forth on it in the legislative session. Like at first we thought it wasn't going to pass, and then they kind of came back and were like, okay, well, with some provisions, we can go ahead and pass it. Do you know how this would play into, being a 16 and 17-year-old, if you married someone that's at least 4 years older than you, that would be, 20 years old. And under, the law, that would kind of be a statutory rape. How would that play, like, with the law and things?
Well, as you said, it would involve the law, and it would nullify the marriage. Very simply. However, the 16 to 17-year-old must also have parental consent. And I don't think we said that a few minutes ago. So
Gotcha.
It establishes a prohibitive, but at the same time some guidance and some comforts around it.
Gotcha. So it'll be the consent is the
Consent
change.
part,
Is
yes.
the change? Okay,
Yes.
Gotcha. All right, and then we can talk about the 2533, the permanent disabled placard.
Yes. Now you see the little blue placards hanging in the windshields of those unfortunate people who are disabled. You have to reapply for it I think it's every 4 years. Well, this will make that placard permanent, which takes away again the necessity to reapply and until the end of life. It will be applicable and be able to be used.
Wow. Okay, and that's I'm sure you do have to be determined by a doctor of what is considered, who is considered to be eligible for like this type of.
Prior to the original awarding of the placard, you must have a doctor's statement filled out and so forth. And then it's approved with the state. But like I said, this bill allows that plastic blue placard to be permanent, that you don't have to reapply for.
Oh, that's great. And then the major one, the income tax bill. I know that's something that a lot of people are concerned about, and some may be confused by it. So if we can give them a little bit of explanation as to what this will really do.
That's House Bill 2526, and it gives a 21.25% income tax reduction to all brackets. What's interesting about this bill, Brandy, is it's retroactive. It goes back to January 1, 23, which means your future deductions and so forth could be less, and you will pay less next year. Now, what concerns me with both tax bills, that's the car tax, property tax, and the personal property tax, and this, is that we have an excess right now of funding, it would appear. 4 or 5 years down the road, once all these taxes have been reduced, and I'm not for taxes, but will the revenue still be there? And if it's not, how will it be recouped? We saw that happen with reduction in the food tax. First year, we were $200 million short on available income at the government. So while it's good now, what will be the long-term consequences, if any? And that concerns me.
Gotcha. And about the car tax too, I know that that's a little different, and we were actually talking a little bit during the break about how it's more of a rebate.
Yes, exactly. And that's different in this respect. Some question has been risen, how would it affect schools and monies reimbursements to public schools? Not at all, because as you said, it is a rebate that comes from the state, which does not come directly from the assessor's office, as I understand it at this point. The other thing that's interesting, in order to receive it or to get the rebate on your car taxes, boat taxes, trailer taxes, so forth, you have to apply for it. So if you don't apply, you won't receive it. Now, when the deadlines and when the applications and so forth are made available, again, the devil's in the works.
Yeah. All right. And it wasn't necessarily on our agenda, but I know there was another big bill, especially with everything going on nationwide with gun and firearms, the concealed weapons carry on college, universities, and campuses. As an educator, how do you feel about this?
Well, let me say this. It was an NRA bill. NRA is quite an effective lobbyist. Most all, if not all, the college, universities, and presidents and so forth were opposed to this bill. However, after public hearings and so forth, the legislature chose to pass it, which allows concealed weapon carry on campuses. Again, there are some requirements with that, that you must pass a course, get a concealed weapons permit, and so forth. So hopefully the training will reduce some of what could be severe consequences for an immediate action using a gun. So at this point, I kind of would say, let's wait and see. But what's been happening across the nation in terms of suggested or some advocating for gun control, this is kind of outside the realm of that.
Gotcha. And I did remember they were talking about something kind of adjacent to this bill too, about letting educators do that. I don't know if that was even promoted this time, but I did see something about letting educators in the classrooms carry or become prevention resource officers, where they can carry a gun and receive training and things for that. But I'm not sure if we actually.
As you said, it was discussed.
Yep.
Now that bill didn't come to fruition, and when I was in the legislature, I talked about the same kind of legislation, similar legislation. And of course the professional bodies, WAFT, so forth, as I understand, opposed that. Now personally, as a parent and a grandparent, my concern is a live gun shooting or perpetrator on a school campus. It's the time delay, not the fault our police and firemen and so forth in getting there. So I always felt that it might be a good idea, and that not all educators, a certain number, undisclosed educators, would have access to a weapon after they've gone through appropriate training. Just a select number who volunteered and agreed to, which would give you an immediate reaction or immediate person to react to a shooting or so forth. Now, again, that's up for debate, as we've said, whether it's good or bad, but definitely time, you may reduce the number of fatalities while you would await the arrival of the proper persons. So I'd say that's going to be ongoing. Definitely we need to do something more to enhance safety for our students. And being from Fayette County, the Fayette County Board of Education has done a lot in terms of pros officers, identification equipment, so forth within schools to identify persons bringing guns in, and lockdowns.
Oh, definitely. And I actually like that you mentioned maybe undisclosed persons, because when you kind of don't know, I mean, that allows another, a level of safety.
Yes.
You don't know who exactly is doing it, but that also kind of prevents access to that firearm
Exactly.
if someone else were trying to access it.
Yes.
So,
And it would be volunteer basis, not everyone, a certain percentage in each school.
wonderful. And I think that will be easier to screen as well for any issues that
Yes.
could potentially come forward.
And
So,
control and make sure that individual person was highly qualified gun expert.
absolutely. All right, and that is all for our community forum this week. Thank you again for joining us, talking to us about everything that is important going on here in Southern West Virginia, legislative-wise. And you guys be sure to tune in next week to our community forum where we speak to another, distinguished guest who's here giving us important information, such as Dave Ferry, about what is going on here in Southern West Virginia. You guys have a great weekend.